Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the January 31st, 2024 meeting of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. Delighted to welcome all board members and advisors, staff, on-site visitors, online listeners, and social media followers. Please note that you can follow the State Board of Education on its social media platforms at edstateBoard_NC. And you can follow our meeting online and see all of our materials by going to SBE meetings at www.dpi.nc.gov. Earlier this month, Governor Roy Cooper announced that 2024 is the year of public schools in North Carolina. Throughout this year, the governor will highlight North Carolina's strong public schools, teachers, and staff across the state to remind us of the positive impacts of a well-funded public education system on the state's economy and communities. I join the governor in his celebration of our public school students and their educators and stand with my colleagues committed to supporting our public school systems, including the Department of Public Instruction and all of our public schools. Public schools certainly are places for learning, and they're also places for healing. Last month, we were presented with mental health data that showed the stark reality of the social and emotional challenges our students are facing. Today, we'll hear about how those challenges are impacting our students in school districts and charter schools. And it's important to remember that these challenges do not impact our public school students exclusively. The evidence, which you can read in the Consolidated Data Report to the General Assembly, clearly highlights the troubles and trauma that are pervasive in our schools and throughout our communities, touching all of us across North Carolina, including each of us in this meeting today and our families. We'll also hear from public school units succeeding under extreme challenges, and we welcome Swain County Schools and Marin Joy Charter School to talk about how they are approaching student trauma. And we're also delighted to welcome Secretary Cody Kinsley of the Department of Health and Human Services, who will share how his agency, a valuable partner of ours, is working to address these challenges. The message I hope we take away from this meeting is that the doors of public schools are open to all, and that we welcome all of our students just as they are, to our public schools for not only academic instruction, but as places of care, support, and belonging. I'm also grateful this month, as I am every month, to welcome so many of our local superintendents who are joining us over the next 2 days. And if you're here today, I'd ask you to stand as we call your name so we can thank you. Donnell Cannon with Marin Joy Charter School, Mark Garrett with Henderson County Schools, Tracy Gritt with McDowell County Schools, Steve Laws, Gaston County Schools, Mark Sales, Swain County Schools, and Robert Taylor with Wake County Public Schools. Would you join me in thanking these leaders? To each of our superintendents, I want to express that we look forward to continuing to do this work with you. The board and agency exist to support you and your educators and your students. And we're eager to engage in ongoing conversations about how we can be of service to you in your efforts to make good on the right to a sound basic education for every student in your communities. For visitors and those listening online, today's agenda involves our board discussions on agenda items, and tomorrow's agenda is the official meeting when the board will act on the items on its action agenda. Board members, you're reminded it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Board members, you received the agenda last week and have had the opportunity to review it. I ask if there are any requests for changes to the agenda. Hearing none, I request a motion for approval of the January 31st and February 1st, 2024 State Board of Education meeting agenda.
State Treasurer Falwell makes that motion.
Motion by the treasurer, second by Mr. Hall. Any discussion? Mr. Fafaria, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Dr. Oxendine,
Yes.
Ms. Camnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Keenan,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers,
Yes.
Mr. Blackburn,
Yes.
Ms. Moore,
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell,
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor Robinson, Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes, motion carries. We have an agenda. And we'll begin our work today with the Healthy Responsible Students Committee led by Mr. Reginald Keenan. Mr. Keenan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'm Reginald Keenan, along with Wendell Hall. Mr. Chair, we bring before you, it's gonna be one discussion item, it's gonna be also an issue session, and then last will be a consent item. But we began this morning talking about the consolidated data report, which is required by General Assembly and mandated by statute. Mr. Chair, as you mentioned in the opening remarks, this data shows things like incidents of crime, reported offenses, loan, and short-term suspension, and expulsion. But also this data offer further insight into the health challenges of our children, such as mental, emotional, and otherwise. And to get us started this morning, we're going to ask Dr. Jeremy Gibbs to come forth and get us going. Got a lot to do this morning, and we're going to try to wrap up the discussion session by 11:25 is our goal. So let's get going.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, Madam Superintendent, members of the board and advisors to the board, good morning.
Morning.
You're a good class. I've been privileged to serve at level schools in North Carolina in some capacity for every single day of my career, my entire adult life. And whether that be as a teacher, an assistant principal, a principal, central office administrator, state agency leader, or those many, many miles I put in behind the wheel of the school bus. Student safety and their success have always been my priorities. The work that we do at every level to keep our students safe is our most important work. Planning, preventing, preparing, supporting, and reacting happens every day and at every point along a continuum. What can we do at the state level? What can be done at the district level? What can be done at the school level? What happens in the classroom? What roles do educators and support staff play? What is the lived reality of the individual student day in and day out? And very importantly, how do families and communities impact school safety and the success of their students? At the opening of last month's meeting, Chair Davis offered some remarks that are appropriate for today's discussion. He said, our students' challenges around attendance, mental health, and learning are interconnected and mutually reinforcing, so they require a holistic and integrated response. Today, you'll hear the annual Consolidated Data Report looking back at the previous school year. While there are some bright spots to share, there are also some concerning data and trends too. You will hear last year's data as well as some of the strategies and programming designed to realize improvements in fostering safe, supportive school environments across our state. You will also hear from leaders at the district and school levels about what this critical work looks like and feels like where it matters the most, at the school and the classroom levels. The data show that these local district and school partners joining us here today are making a positive impact and disrupting some trends. To borrow again from the chair's comments last month, honestly facing these brutal realities has the potential to manifest in us some feelings of dejection or maybe even being overwhelmed. But let's find strength in remembering that those who came before us faced even greater challenges, and they instilled in us the spirit to overcome and to leave this a better place for future generations. At this time, I'll ask Karen Fairley, the Executive Director of the Center for Safer Schools, to bring the report to the board. After her report, Assistant Superintendent Dixon will introduce our school and district partners. And then after they've shared their support stories, I believe Mr. Keenan will open the floor for discussion. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Good morning to the chair, vice chair, the superintendent. As you know, I am Karen Fairley, and I am the director of the Center for Safer Schools.
Well, is Donna or Michelle free?
I'm sorry? We can move it to the desk. Yes, that'd be fine. Is that fine? Okay. And we're going to start the 22-23 Consolidated Data Report. This is just a slide for the statutory requirements. It is required, and we know that, and so we're preparing for that. It's due to the General Assembly by March 15th. This is relevant to goal number 1 of the State Board of Education, and it addresses the 2 objectives, 1 and 4. So the Center for Safer Schools, our duties. As the Center for Safer Schools, we are required by statute to provide training, technical assistance, and resources to all PSUs. These are some of the things that we have done since I have begun as the director in January of 2021. We have conducted mental health first aid trainings. As my staff comes on board, if they are program staff, then they are also trained to conduct those trainings in the district's adult, youth, and teen. We have our RISE Back to School Safety Summit, and we utilize that as a way to address issues that we see as we get this data. We create that RISE program, that Back to School Summit, with trainings from various partners around the state, from the SBI, to administrators, to social workers, to psychologists, wherever we see the need. So we utilize this report in order to prepare for our next Back to School Safety Summit. We provide technical assistance to the PSUs by helping them to update, modify their safety action plans. The districts are doing a tremendous job on getting that work done. We also provide safety grants that are given to us through the General Assembly. As you noted the other day, we gave out $35 million to over 200 applicants. The reality of it is, this is the first time that we had $139 million worth of requests, but it was our intent to ensure that we provided each district with something to address the concerns that they have. So this data is collected through PowerSchool and incident management module, and submitted through the state discipline report, that's the crime and violence, as is the data on alternative learning programs. Okay. So, beginning in early 2021, when I began, Amy Powell-Moman and I, and she is in the data section, looked at what has happened previously, and we understood that we had to work diligently to standardize, if you will, how things were being reported, consistency in the reporting, understanding that we had to get a common vocabulary and how things were reported, and adding codes for reporting purposes so that we could minimize the other box, so that we could really understand what the true data meant. And so she and I worked diligently. Now, what I was quite aware of at the time is that when you start to organize or standardize something, you'll start to see more of that something, because now you're looking for that something, which is a good thing, because you want to know what's going on. So we created guidance and standard definitions. We produced over 15 hours of recorded videos with walking PSUs through how to enter data, the common mistakes when reporting data, and best practices to avoid under and over reporting. We offered clear explanation and logic behind the required reporting, and we assist them in thoroughly checking data to ensure accuracy during data entry. We held trainings, and these were conducted by Amy Palmoman for public school units staff on how to properly report incidents. Sessions held at RISE Back to School Safety Summit and the CIS Conference. We did trainings that were different for administrators, data managers, and data coordinators. And there was a Canvas course created to house documentation and videos to outline best practices and to allow districts to be able to go at their given time. We expanded the discipline manual to serve as a more thorough reporting resource to public school unit. From the time of 2021 until now, it has more than doubled in size. Okay. We increased access to anonymous reporting, the Say Something anonymous reporting system. We have been successful in House Bill 605, the mandates for threat assessment teams in North Carolina schools that will begin in 24-25. We have created a student engagement program within the center so that we can approach the students themselves and find out what their concerns are. We have implemented a program called EKG2, educating kids about guns and gang violence. We have created a Shine and Seed Club, which is a complement to our Save Club. Our Save Club is utilized through the anonymous reporting system. The center has also created a multidisciplinary team, and this team supports us in our initiatives by including our subject matter experts to assist in identifying, developing, or enhancing programs to meet our legislative requirement. Our multidisciplinary team and parent engagement committee will help PSUs identify best practice. Our superintendent already had a parent advisory commission. We copied that. We created a parent engagement committee that just focuses on safety. Of course, hers focuses on a broader spectrum of what she's responsible for. This focuses only on school safety, and we have several members from her committee who are on our engagement committee. At the end of the summer, during our RISE Summit, we will distribute a discipline survey based on the findings that are in this present report. So definitely these are the topics of areas that we will discuss. The changes include, for this report, students without disabilities as a subgroup. And so as I prepare to give you the numbers, I've already said to you that once you start to standardize or once you start to identify or trying consistency, you will see that you will see numbers change. They will increase because now you are looking for them. When a school district uses preventative measures such as school resource officers, metal detectors, and camera systems to prevent and detect crime, it could impact statistics by making behavior more apparent, thus increasing the number of reportable offenses, whereas before behavior could go unnoticed by administrators. Changing school climate with the utilization of the See Something, Say Something as a result of Sandy Hook Promise anonymous reporting system that is active in 105 school districts and 137 charters. There has been 32,000 school tips submitted by students since its inception. In 21-22, we had 83 school safety grants that requested camera systems, metal detectors, and requested vape detectors. In 23, this current one, we had 146 requested camera systems and 37 requested metal detectors. And so why I'm saying that is that as I prepare to give you the numbers, you will see that part of the increase is because now there is a mechanism to identify those things. So as will be seen in the next few slides, we will cover the number of disciplinary incidents, alternative learning placement, and withdrawal dates for dropouts reported in the 22-23 school year. While the data reported covers the 19 and 20, I'm sorry, y'all, at this age, I gotta have my glasses, okay. Academic year, caution should be taken when making comparison to previous and subsequent years. After the March 16, 2020 school closure, there was significant reduction in the number of incidents of crime and violence, suspension, alternative learning placement. This reduction continued through 2021. They're given these cautions as well as a return to reporting in 21-22, which is consistent with pre-pandemic school year, even though 19-20 and 2021 school year data will remain in all relevant tables and figures. The data will not be used in comparison throughout this report. There was a total of 349 disciplinary incidents from July 2022 through June 2023. That is an increase from the previous year, and that number was 436,818. This is next slide. There was a total of 11,184 alternative learning placements from July 2022 through June 2023. That is an increase from the year previously of 9,788 in placements. There was a total of 10,915 dropouts from July 2022 through 23, and that decreased from the previous year, which was 11,711 dropouts.
Ms. Farley, 1 second, please, Mr. Vice Chair.
Just a very quick clarifying question. Is this data for all LEAs as well as all charter schools?
Yes.
So it's every PSU regardless?
Every PSU.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
It helps
sir.
us with looking at the data.
Are we on 15? Are we on slide 15? Because I can't see it. Okay. 13,193 acts of crime and violence were reported across the state in 22-23, which is over 2,000 more than it was in 21-22. The rate was 8.77 per 1,000 students, which is higher than it was the previous year at 7.51. We recognize that what goes on in our communities comes into our schools and vice versa. So with this chart, consistent with previous years, possession of a controlled substance in violation of a law for a minor was the most frequently reportable act of crime in 22-23. The second most reportable act reported was possession of a weapon, not a firearm, followed by assault on school personnel as the third most reported. Two of the reportable crimes were not reported in 22-23, and that was rape and kidnapping. In elementary schools, possession of a weapon that is not a firearm was reported most frequently in 22-23, followed by assault on school personnel and possession of a controlled substance in violation of law for a minor. The most frequently reported crime in middle schools were possession of a controlled substance in violation of a law for a minor, followed by possession of a weapon, not a firearm, Whereas in high school, the crime reported most frequently was possession of a controlled substance in violation of law for a minor, followed by a possession of a weapon, not a firearm. Possession of a controlled substance in violation of law for a minor showed increases of 35.7% for 1 year and 54.8% over 5 years. Possession of a weapon, not a firearm, showed a decrease of 3.7 for 1 year, but an increase of 54.5% for 5. $7,075 acts of crime and violence were reported in high school grades in 22-23, which is over 1,000 more than the previous year. The rate was 15.10 per 1,000 students, increased from the previous year where the rate was 13.16. In all middle school grades, there were 4,470 crimes committed by student offenders with a rate of 12.63 crimes per 1,000 middle school students. Across the elementary grades, there was 1,644 crimes in 22-23 with a rate of 2.41 crimes per 1,000 elementary school students. In 22-23, there were 247,454 short-term suspensions reported statewide. The short-term suspension rate was 164.57 short-term suspensions per 1,000 students enrolled. The total number of short-term suspension increased by 13.5% in 22-23 compared to the previous year, where there were 217,928 short-term suspensions. The 22-23 short-term suspension rate of 164.57 per 1,000 students increased by 12.3% from previous year. Next one. Within the race ethnicity subgroup, Black students had the highest rate of short-term suspension in 22-23, 335.59 per 1,000 students enrolled, followed by American Indian students and 2 or more race students. Across all student subgroups in 22-23, Black students, the 335.59 per 1,000 students enrolled, American Indian students, 331.48 per 1,000 students, and students with disabilities, 284.22 per 1,000 student, had the highest rate of short-term suspension. As seen in previous years, males received more short-term suspension than females in 22-23. The rate of short-term suspension for male students, 217.75 per 1,000 students enrolled, was 2.1 times the rate for female students at 105.28 per students enrolled, per 1,000 students enrolled. Compared to 21-22, short-term suspension rates in 22-23 increased for all races and ethnicity. Short-term suspension rate for all races and ethnicities except Asians were the highest in the last 5 years. Next. In 22-23, middle school grades reported the most short-term suspension, 107,199, and had the highest rate of short-term suspension per 1,000 students, 302.83. High school grades reported 84,539 short-term suspensions and had a rate of 180.40 per 1,000 students enrolled. Elementary grades reported 55,000 715 short-term suspension and had a rate of 81.81 per 1,000 students enrolled. In 22-23, 708 long-term suspensions were reported, an increase of 2.2% from last year. The rate of long-term suspension in 22-23 was 47.09 per 100,000 students. The 22-23 rate of long-term suspension increased by 1% from last year. Male students received more long-term suspension than females in 22-23. The rate of long-term suspensions for male students, 65.83 per 100,000 students enrolled, was 2.5 times the rate for female students at 26.44 per 100,000 students enrolled. Within the race ethnicity subgroup, Black students had the highest rate of long-term suspension of 91.36 per 100,000 students, followed by 2 or more race students at 62.40 per 100,000 students. Asian students have the lowest rate of long-term suspension per 100,000 students. Next. The rate of long-term suspension for male students was a little higher than last year, but the highest in the last 5 years. The rate of long-term suspension for female students was a little lower than last year and the second highest in the last 5 years. Compared to 21-22, long-term suspension rates decreased for all race ethnicities except American Indian, 2 or more races, and white. Long-term suspension rate for American Indians, 2 or more races, and whites were the highest in the last 5 years. High school grades reported the most long-term suspensions in 22-23 and account for 53.2% of all long-term suspensions. Across all high school grades, 9, 10, 11, 12, including 13 in XG, 377 long-term suspensions were reported statewide for a rate of 80.45 suspensions per 100,000 students. There were 273 long-term suspensions in middle school grades in 22-23. The rate of long-term suspension in middle school was 77.12 per 100,000 students. In 22-23, there were 64 expulsions across all North Carolina schools. The total number of expulsions increased by 33.3% from the 48 that it was in the previous year. Most expulsions occurred in high school grades. 9th graders received the most expulsions during the 22-23 academic year, followed by 10th and 11th graders. In 22-23, for the 5th consecutive academic year, there was 0 corporal punishment reported. In 22-23, North Carolina Public Schools assigned 256,314 in-school suspensions of a half day or more with a rate of 170.46 per 1,000 students enrolled. The total number of in-school suspensions increased 18.4% from the previous year. The rate of in-school suspensions increased 17.1% from 21-22 to 22-23. The rate of in-school suspension for male students was 2.1 times the rate of in-school suspension for female students. Within race ethnicity subgroup, Black students had the highest rate of in-school suspensions, 299.77 per 1,000 students enrolled, followed by 2 or more race students at 209.11 per 1,000 students. Asian students had the lowest rate of in-school suspension. In 22-23, Black students, students with disability, male students, and 2 or more races students had the highest rate of in-school suspension per 1,000 students among the various student subgroups. Students in middle school grades received the most in-school suspension in 22-23 and had the highest rate of in-school suspension per 1,000 students. Ninth grade students received the most in-school suspensions, followed by 7th grader and 8th graders. In 22-23, schools reported 4,566 alternative learning placements as a disciplinary action. The total number of placements increased 14.2% from previous year. The rate of alternative learning placement was 3.04 per 1,000 students. The rate of placement increased 12.9% from previous year. In 22-23 school year, 34.3% of the 4,566 alternative learning placement for disciplinary reasons were assigned to female students and 65.7% to male students. The rate of placement for females are 2.11 per 1,000 students and 3.86 per 1,000 students for males. Students in, I'm sorry, can you go back to 35? I'm sorry. Black students, American Indian students, students with disability, and male students had the highest rate of placement per 1,000 students. Students in high school grades received the most alternative learning placement for disciplinary reasons in 22-23, totaling 54.7% of placement. Middle school grades had the highest rate of placement per 1,000 students. Alternative learning, next slide. Alternative learning programs and schools reported 11,184 students enrolled during the 22-23 academic year, a 14.3% increase from the previous year. In 22-23, the rate of ALP enrollment was 7.44 per 1,000 students. The rate of enrollment saw an increase of 13% compared to the previous year. Next slide. In 22-23 school year, 36.6% of the 11,184 ALP enrollments were for female students and 63.4% for male students. The rate of ALP enrollment for females was 5.51 per 1,000 students and 9.12 per 1,000 male students. In 2023, I'm still on that same thing. The highest rate for ALP's enrollments per 1,000 students were for American Indian students, Black students, students with a disability, and 2 or more races.
Excuse me,
Next slide.
Shirley.
Yes.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
To the distinction between reassignment to ALPS placement as a disciplinary act, in number 4, as disciplinary action, and then this talks about alternative learning programs and school placement. What are the difference between the two?
Right, so the first one is for a disciplinary action of some sort. The other one is a voluntary, that they choose to go. Mhm. Yeah, I'm on 39. Am I on 39? Okay. The rate of ALPS enrollments for females in 22-23 was the highest in the last 5 years. For male students, there was a 14.49% increase in the rate from the previous year. Next slide. All 22-23 rates of ALPS enrollments by race ethnicity subgroup increased from 21-22 except white. American Indian recorded the highest rate in the last 5 years. Next slide. In 22-23, North Carolina public schools reported 10,523 dropouts in grades 1 through 12, and that's including grades 13 and XG. This is a 11.7% decrease from the previous year. North Carolina recorded 9,612 dropouts in high schools grade 9 through 13 for 22-23 academic year, and that is a 11.3 decrease from the previous year. The high school dropout rate was 1.95 dropouts per every 100 high school. The 22-23 dropout rate decreased by 13.3% from the previous year. Students dropped out most frequently in grade 9, followed by grade 10, 11, and 12 in that order. While white students account for the largest number and percentage of students who dropped out in 22-23, given the size of the student population across the state, the dropout rate for white students is the second lowest among the student subgroup as 1.38 dropouts event per 100 students. The lowest rate was for Asian students at 0.42 dropout events per 100 students. Students with disability had the highest dropout rate among the student subgroup. The only student subgroup whose high school dropout rates were below the state rate were females, Asians, white, and students without disability. So now we are going to talk about improving school climate and culture. And so we at the center, DPI, recognize cultural differences in students served. For example, non-white adolescents and families have greater access to KINS network and use them more than white adolescents and families. Research shows that organizations in Black families has historically extended beyond nuclear families. Welcoming extended family members into school communication events, etc., would offer additional support and protective factors to children of color. And that is part of the parent engagement group that we at the center have, because we understand that districts are reporting these numbers to us, and it is our job to provide that support. And so provide support for parent guardians to increase protective factors. Again, the purpose of the parent engagement group with the center. Employ a non-floating social worker at each school, elementary, middle, and high, who focuses on prevention, intervention, and referrals. Next slide. Employ qualified professionals to offer cultural sensitivity and cultural awareness training to school staff and employees. The goal is to reach cultural humility, not cultural competence. Offer trauma-informed care training to school staff and employees. Implement a statewide discipline matrix model. All that the center does as it relates to training and technical assistance is to provide a standard for the districts to adopt and modify as they see fit based on the particular needs of their area. Include school resource officers in positive interaction, not just classroom behavior management and situations of arrest or other punitive measures. We are utilizing our EKG2 program, educating kids on guns and gangs, to bring that to fruition. The training of the SROs who become the facilitator of this program, it meets the 7th grade health standard, and we are utilizing that so that we can have a better perception of our SROs as they help support our school districts. Continue interaction with districts, beginning in my tenure after the superintendent brought me on as director. I have been going out to the districts. I have been touring the districts, and we will continue to do that so that I can hear. I have not quite been from Murphy to Manio yet, but I am on my way. And so that is to allow us, the center, to hear the concerns that districts have. And that's how we connect with teachers, the next point on how the center can support them in relation to discipline. We are also hiring a educator to work to help us in the area of discipline. We'll continue to refine, train, and provide evidence to the field of effectiveness of early warning systems. Hence, the multidisciplinary team that supports the center will help identify what those are. Ensure these measures are priority points in recovery planning, address the priority points in our state and regional support structures, i.e. our Back to School Safety Summit, and some other initiatives that we will carry out based on this consolidated data report. Next session. In the new session, we was successful in securing House Bill 605, where we will look to help districts build threat assessment teams so that we may address our students prior to them being a harm to themselves or others. We have, under our direction of our superintendent, all of us under our superintendent, but the grooming prevention, we are addressing that. The center is working with some industry, to create a video, 3 videos to be in particular to address grooming in our schools. And those will be ready for the new school year. They'll be ready before, but we will showcase them at our new school year in 24-25. The center now has the alternative learning program under it, and we are hiring someone with the knowledge base to be able to support our alternative learning programs. And discipline data sessions will be expanded as we do RISE, as we do other trainings that we'll do in our training center in Montgomery County. We will utilize those opportunities to help districts with identifying discipline data and how to do it thoroughly, consistently, so that we can see what our true numbers are. Reportable offense sessions will be expanded, where we will bring in law enforcement officers, school administrators to help districts to understand what a reportable offense is, when it should be reported, and how it should be reported. A parent component will be added. In this slide, we added codes to differentiate between usage and possession. So we added codes in, new behavior codes, because Amy and I started to get other codes that were other actions that desired we identify a code for that particular thing. But we also wanted to differentiate between students using and the possession. So go ahead. So the next to last slide, one of the things that we have started, and it will be implemented in the fall as well, is our standard response protocol, so that we are consistent. So for the center, it's all about trying to be consistent throughout the state, giving districts the opportunity to see what best practice is, and then them making the decision what's best for their individual districts on what part they select. We will be utilizing I Love You Guys as a standard response protocol, and we will be providing trainings to all the districts for that. I think that's it. Is that it? Okay. I will take my seat.
Thank you, Ms. Fairley. We're gonna save questions to later if we may. We'd like to have Ron Dixon to come up and get the 2 public units to talk with us. And then we have time, we'll come back for questions. We got about 30 minutes left in our session, so later, Ron.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I want to thank Executive Director Fairley for that informative presentation and all that her and her team are doing to help our districts and schools support our students. It's my pleasure to present our next 2 presenters. Dr. Gibbs and I have had an opportunity to meet with them and connect with them and learn about the different initiatives that they have in place that they believe are helping to move their schools in positive direction. So we have from Swain County Schools, Superintendent Mark Sell, and then we have from Maureen Joy Charter School in Durham, North Carolina, we have Dr. Donnell Cannon and his team. I'll allow him to introduce them. But they're both going to come in their own way, and we'll start with Superintendent Sale.
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
Good morning to each of you.
Good morning.
I want to reset my clock because I have been told that I have 7 minutes. Okay? You see a slide presentation in front of you like you'll see all day long, and my goal with this slide presentation today is to help you see primarily 3 reasons that I believe that Swain County has achieved some of the acknowledgement that we're receiving today. I want to thank Chairman Davis and Chairman Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, all of you for allowing me to have this time. Thank you, Dr. Gibbs, for calling me, and Mr. Fafaria as well. Could we have the next slide, please? Swain County is not a small county geographically. You can see some pictures of it there. If you can't see this, at this point, I'm sure that it could be or has been provided for you. The information that you have on the slide, I have taken from my future NC, and so I just robbed something. I didn't want to have to recreate it. And I think the important piece on this is to note that we have about 14,000 people who live in our county, but about 65% of them or more don't have a college degree or a 2-year degree. That's the clientele that we're working with, and I think that that's important for us because we realized 2 or 3 years ago that some of the initiatives, some of the things that we were pushing in Swain County were not necessarily targeted to our demographic. And so we reassessed ourselves, and we have made some adjustments since then. I believe that you will see some of that data supported towards the end of this presentation. Could I have the next slide, please? This is who Swain County is. I want to draw your attention to one word in that, and that word is non-taxable. Swain County Schools lives in an area where 85% of the land is controlled by other entities. We have a 15% tax base. And why is that important? Because that severely limits our ability to raise funding. So we live by the support of the federal and the state government. Fortunately, we have impact aid that helps with that. But the local expenditures that are given to us, or the local funding that is given to us for our expenditure, makes up about 3% of our total budget. As a matter of fact, there probably is not even enough money there to pay for all of our utilities. I'm pretty sure that that is true. So we are handicapped perhaps in some areas there, although if you look at the numbers, comparing our expenditure per student to others, I believe that we're doing really pretty well with that, and that's by selective use. Swain County is blessed. Next slide, please. Thank you. Swain County is blessed to have a large portion of Native American students. We have over 20%, probably closer to 25% of our students that are Native American. About 33 to 35% of our students are not white, and we work to try to provide individualized programs for those particular cultures. I will tell you, I'll be honest with you, that those are some areas that we really do need to work on. And I have a call in to the principal chief of the Cherokee Nation to continue working on that and see if we can't receive some funding resources, because the way to work on that, in my opinion, is to have people on staff who understand the culture and then can bring that culture into our lives so that we can help them with their work as well. Could I have the next slide, please? Swain County was disappointed a couple of years ago whenever we got our test results and we found that two of our schools were considered low performing. I am so pleased today to say that all of our schools are meeting growth. We are all performing like we're supposed to be. Although we are C schools, one of our strategic goals is for all of our schools within 5 years to be B-level schools. I believe that we can reach that, but it's going to take a great deal of work. What I am exceptionally proud of is that one of the schools that was low performing exceeded growth last year. And that's a credit to where the credit belongs to begin with. And that is not with me. It is with our staff and with our students and with the effort that they put. And everything that you hear today will be a reflection on them. Could I have the next slide, please? This slide represents that. We have a very experienced staff, although we have a lot of staff that we're having to draw in from other places. The staffing crisis for schools is very real. And the farther west that you go, the more real it becomes. Once you pass the counties that have the large abilities to offer stipends and supplements, it becomes more difficult to attract. And I'm very thankful to the General Assembly that they have given us that opportunity, because before they did that, we had a 0 supplement rate. 0. No supplements in Swain County. And now we're able to compete at least at some level. but I'm grateful to our staff. Next slide, please. I think that one of the reasons that Dr. Gibbs and Dr. Fafaria called is because you can see a trend here. You can see the trend that Swain County 5 years ago, 6 years ago, was at the top of the list for concern as far as rate for criminal acts, and it has declined a great deal. And what we're seeing across the state, I believe, is an increase. And so as that data was being looked at, Dr. Gibbs and Mr. Fafaria called and said, so what are you doing? How are you addressing that? And that's why I'm here today. Could I have the next slide, please? One of the reasons is we do have a level of expectation. Our short-term suspension rate is probably higher than the state, but you have to remember something else. Whenever you're talking about a district that has 1,800 to 1,850 students, each student counts extra, okay? When we're talking about students per 1,000, Swain County, one student in Swain County counts about 2.5 students somewhere else, okay? And I'm not trying to dismiss the numbers on this because I think that it's important for you to understand that we do have a high level of expectation, but we are making strides to improve that. If you'll see the next slide for in-school suspensions, you'll see that that is true there. Now the numbers the colors got flipped on this. I don't know how. It's not you, it's me, okay? But I want you to see that our in-school suspension rates are going down as compared to the rest of the state. And I also want you to note that our middle school suspension rate and in-school suspension rate is lower than the others that you're seeing. I heard a few minutes ago that the middle school numbers are exceptionally high. Ours are not, okay? And there's a reason for that, I believe, and I think that I can explain that to you in just a minute. Could I have the next slide, please? This is our graduation rate, and I am so proud of this because you can see where our graduation rate was just a few years ago, and you can see that today we're surpassing the state. That's also true of our ACT scores at the high school in some areas. I was the high school principal 10 years ago, and these were our targets, and we are reaching them now. How many years ago? 10. This is not something that happens overnight. And I'm so proud of our staff and our students for accomplishing that. Now let's get to the important part. Let's get to the why. The first reason for the why, I believe, is because in Swain County, we have a culture of support and expectation. Now you'll see on this slide 3 different elements. One is a board policy, and one is something from our code of conduct, and then the last piece is a statement from the student handbook. We went to our school board and said, we have a problem with vaping. Have you heard that today already? Right? We have a problem with vaping. We need some support. And they immediately said, what do you need? And they rewrote the policy to help us immediately. Okay? I don't know if all school systems work that way. I know I don't want to work anywhere else because our school system does work that way. And I am grateful for that. And because of that culture of expectation and support that not only goes there but extends into our resource officers. We have a resource officer at every single school. And that is partially supported by the county, that's partially supported through safety grant, and it's partially supported through our local budget, okay? All of those pieces together, in my opinion, wrap to say to the students, we want to provide for you a place where you can study without disruption and without interference. We want to take care of you. I also want you to understand that we don't have some of the issues that you heard of just a few minutes ago. When we talk about major discipline problems at the high school, our number one major problem is skipping class. It's not drug issues. Now, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but we have a different level of concern than some other places, okay? But we have a high level of expectation. Could I have the next slide? We are very clear in our expectation. What you see here is directly from the middle school. In my opinion, this is one of the reasons that the middle school is showing the data results that it is. If you look on the left-hand side, you'll see a pyramid, and you probably can't see all the words, and I understand that, all right? But that is the behavior discipline pyramid for the middle school. And there are points assigned to each level of infraction. And the students know exactly what those are. And they know exactly what the expectations are. And those are modeled and those are informed. But along with that at the same time, there is an opportunity to regain those points. And if you look at the pictures that really take up the predominant part of the slide, which is what I wanted, you'll see what is one of the most effective and amazing opportunities our middle schools have, and it's called the Monday morning meeting. Every Monday, they take 30 minutes. The whole school goes to the gym, and they have some activities. They play some games. They set their focus on what they're going to do that week, and they honor students and staff who have made accomplishments in all kinds of different areas. That sets the tone for the culture in the middle school, and the rest of the week flows directly out of that. I believe that that single event that was established by Dr. Brandon Sutton, who you just stole from me, by the way, thank you so much. I believe that that single event has helped lead the middle school to the place that it is today. And I believe that that's the reason that they came out of low performing and exceeded growth. All of these pieces together. You can tell that I'm proud of them. Now, the QR code that's in the upper corner reflects that as well. I don't know if you use QR codes with your cell phone, but our 6th grade students were focused on by our local television station. I've got 15 seconds. Really? Okay. They were shown on a local television station because our exceptional students wrote a book called How to Survive the 6th Grade. And I really wanted for you, if you want to look at the raw video footage of that. This is not the television presentation. This is just them talking. And you'll see that what I'm talking about with the expectation, they say it, but also the opportunity, the book, and the joy and completion of the task is one of the reasons that we are where we are, or they are where they are. Could I have the next slide, and I'll hurry. All of that is built out of the Leader in Me. We are a Leader in Me district. That is how we develop our culture. The Leader in Me parallels with the Portrait of a Graduate that's come out of DPI in the last year or two. And I want you to know that we were Portrait of a Graduate through Leader in Me before Portrait of a Graduate was cool. We've been doing this for 10 years. So, Superintendent Truitt, I think you just stole our idea, actually. Okay. There's supposed to be some pictures here, and that's okay. I don't know why they're not coming up, but if those pictures were there, you would see charts that are hanging outside the office in the high school that have wildly important goals by each department. And those goals are part of the Leader in Me process, where they say, this is what we want to do, this is how we're going to get there, this is more important than anything else, and they monitor it all the time through their PLCs. That has been a transformative process for us, and again, that's all through the Leader in Me. I really wanted to get to this slide because that guy right there matters. Okay? His name is Kevin. And Kevin is the embodiment of what Swain County is. Kevin doesn't come from the advantage that I've come from. When Kevin comes to school, he's just getting to school. His mama is single and she works herself to death. It's the same story that we see everywhere. But what you see right there in Kevin is a piece of candy in his hands. And Superintendent Truitt, this is going to make you smile, okay? And the reason that he is holding a piece of candy in his hand is because he just went from red to green on iReady assessment this year. This year. Okay? Now, his teacher, who happens to be my daughter, his teacher was Science of Reading before Science of Reading was cool. And she wants to grow up and not be like her dad. She wants to grow up and she wants to be a literacy specialist to help kids. And so that's her passion. But what matters is this. Kevin is loved by his teacher. Kevin is loved by his school. Obviously, Kevin is loved by the central office because I would take him home in a minute. But that's the culture of Swain County Schools. We love our kids, and we will do whatever we can do and go above and beyond to help them. Why can we do that? Because we're small. We try to keep our class sizes small. We have expectations. We support. It's all of those. It's not one single thing, but that's who we are. And I believe that's why you see the data in this report from Swain County that you're seeing. Can I prove that? No. But I can feel it in my heart. So, can I have the last slide? I want to invite you all to come to Swain County. That's where I live. And we'll show you what our schools are doing. And I'll introduce you to Kevin. And I'll introduce you to our staff. And when you come back, you'll know why Swain County is what it is. Thank you all very much.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Donnell Cannon, and I am the Executive Director at Marine Joy Charter School. Formerly, I was a system leader in a traditional public school, transitioned recently over about a year and a half ago to Marine Joy to begin to dream boldly about what our schools could become for our young people. I'm also joined here by Mr. Chair.
Good morning as well, everybody. My name is Jeremy Wall. I'm our school principal. Similar to Donnell, I have been at Marine Joy now for a while. Well, similar to Donnell, I've been in schools for a while. I was at Marine Joy as a teacher in 2012, teaching math. Got to leave and go to traditional public schools to be an administrator, and was invited back by some staff at Marine Joy leadership at the time, and an opportunity to be the dean of students. I'm now the principal.
Yeah, so really quickly, a little bit about Marine Joy. It was established in 1997. This was the original band of charter schools approved by the state. We serve approximately 97% of young people who identify as students of color. So before, as we get started, we're gonna start at the highest altitude at a system level, and then Jeremy would jump in. He'll add more granularities so we can see what's happening at a grain size. But to begin, I first want to start with, this is my deepest conviction, and our school's deepest conviction, that systems achieve what they're designed to achieve. That the outcomes or the results are direct consequences of how the system is designed and structured. As such, we don't believe, when we see adverse student data, we don't believe that we have a student problem. We believe that there's a system tension. And so instead of looking at young people, we look at what are the systems that are containers that our young people have to navigate within our system and in our school system and beyond. And so many of you have seen this before. So one of my convictions is that we are in an industrial era model. As a result of that, many of our young people aren't deeply seen and heard, their passions aren't realized, their contexts aren't explored. And we don't embed that into the very fabric of school models. And many of our traditional public schools, and many of our schools in general, are built in a set of efficiencies. It's really hard to design a model around the individual context and lived experiences of every young person and around their zones of geniuses. And so we're making a bet that if we were to attempt to do that well, then we would see better outcomes for young people. And so this is what we're doing. And so this graph illustrates just how we think about school redesign at Marine Joy. And so as you can see, we have the probable futures, the likely outcomes. Because we believe if we continue to pick up from our past and do what we've done and pick up from our past and pull it into our future, we'll continue to get the likely outcomes. But nothing will change. You're exploring some of that data that's in front of you. I can guarantee you if we don't shift anything in our system, we'll be sitting back here next year and the outcomes will be identical. However, we're exploring, what does it mean to pursue just a possible future? How do we pause long enough and create pauses in our system so we can reflect on how do we get to a bolder set of outcomes? How do we get to a desired set of aims? Which means that we have to explore different inputs and outputs to ensure that young people get exactly what they need. And so one way in which we're doing that, again, at the highest altitude, is we've been leveraging the science of learning and development. And so the science of learning and development is essentially this essence of what is known about how young people learn best. And so what happens in many schools that I've been a part of, I've served at the district level, I've also served as a high school principal, yada, yada, yada. And I can guarantee you many of our schools, we focus on the cognitive aspect of developing young people. That's essentially the ethos, what the ecosystem has demanded. But there are significant portions of what it means to develop a young person that is significantly lost. We don't design models and practices and set of experiences around the young person's context, their lived experiences, their individual differences, their identity, and their motivation. And if we're not doing that well, then we can't expect a different set of outcomes for young people. And so we're trying to pursue this overlay. How might we explore the interplay of these particular components throughout a school day to ensure that young people get a better set of outcomes? And again, that means double clicking on each one of them. That relationship matters. Again, if we want young people to learn best, we want a different set of discipline outcomes, we have to explore how these are interplayed, and again, they're not just isolated components of a day. So we're trying to bake that into our overall design of a school. Here's how we're doing it. This is what really brought me into the charter space, was to leverage those flexibilities to really do something different. And so we've established what we call the Learning Studio, powered by Marine Joy. And essentially, we know that $600 billion across the nation is spent on K-12. Only 0.2% of that is spent on research and development, right? We don't create a natural pauses. So we're still on this like conveyor belt expecting, like, you know, sausage factory on a sausage conveyor belt expecting to give us chicken nuggets, but it just won't give us that because we're never designed to give us that. But of course, like the model itself keeps us running as educators. We don't have enough pauses to be able to explore what could be different. And so this is our approach, is setting up we're taking an ambidextrous approach to redesigning the system. So essentially we have a research and development arm at Marine Joy we call the Learning Studio, and they partner with young people, and they partner with families, and they partner with our staff to really define like where we're headed, to really push the system closer to equity by partnering with young people and their families, and design like what is known about those kids right into the very DNA of our model. And so we think of this as like a ship in a plane. And so our ship is like the traditional model that we're in. So we have to uphold that, where we have a number of folks who are thinking about what's the future. Those folks are kind of patching in gaps, keeping that ship afloat. On the other end, we have our plane. And our plane is our research and development arm. It's a new mode of transportation. And so Jeremy and I talk about this often, but like we're trying to share the nautical information, aeronautical, so that folks who are on the plane right now understand this is a new method in which we're going to be designing and moving for young people, while also like holding up a care model. So it allows us to, again, pursue ambidextrous an approach, you know, better than we've done it before. This is like one of our biggest bets. And so some of the byproduct of that is this particular division of our school is using the human-centered design model to really partner with young people to design some bold experiences for young people. So some of that starts with empathy interviews. So we do empathy interviews with every young person in our school, every staff in our school. We distill that information. We take a step back. We bake that into the very model, and we're defining a set of student learning experiences. Some of those early practices over the last year have resulted in better disciplinary outcomes because young people are seeing they're belonged within our school model as a result of redesigning some of our processes. I'm gonna get out the way in a sec. And then, so a lot of that is like, we look at like the science, what is known about like how young people are showing up. So a lot of our young people, 97% of our young people are Black and brown. These young people experience significant amounts of trauma, which means that our young people are constantly in their STEM parts of the brain. So essentially we try to douse the model, Marine Joy, with a significant amount of joy, so that we replace the cortisol in the young people's bodies with a set of oxytocin, have a deep connections, which Jeremy will talk about, to help young people live in the learning parts of their brain, the prefrontal cortex. And our bet is if we do that well and we model the actual school day, like how the brain works, then we get a better set of outcomes because young people are filled with more oxytocin than they had before. That's our biggest bet. And Jeremy's gonna jump in and just share some grain size detail.
Go down. Sorry. Next slide. Next slide. Keep going. Right here, the anchors. So one of the things to note is that when I came to Marine Joy, I was a dean of students. My task then as dean of students was to work with the leadership team to change the culture. We were a school that did live in a space that was much more punitive. Students out of class a lot, students being suspended a lot, problems not being solved, just like the cycle continuing. Being able to get to the place we are now has been hard work, and it has also involved trying to figure out how to work within a system, realizing thankful with the addition of Donnell to our school, that what we really need to do is blow the system up and do something different, right? So I'm gonna take you through some of the things that we're doing right now on our process to be able to get to that place. So the one thing to keep in your mind is that we are not right here touting a model that has solved all the problems. This is our prologue, okay? Those are our core values. That's just how we lead every session with our staff. We start by entrenching ourselves in the things that we believe and we hold dear, knowing that those things that undergird every practice that we have in our school, and undergird all the decisions that we make. So we bring ourselves back to that, we bring our students back to that. That allows us to make sure that as we're making decisions, we know that we're operating within the spirit of our school. We can go to the next slide. Our school years begin with community contracts. Some of the things you're gonna see here are not revolutionary. It's just effective practice. And what I've noticed in some schools is that a community contract is an option. It should not be. So in our school, it's not an option. All of our classes develop these contracts at the beginning of the year, and the idea here is that we're going to hold to these throughout the year, and as a leadership team and through the structures we build at our school, we're going to help support students actually being able to live into that. Because often these contracts are aspirational. Some students don't have the skills yet to be able to actually meet the whole contract that they've actually acknowledged. Same thing with our adults. We can go to the next slide. And so those it's in this order. Cool. So with those strategies, here's one of the strategies that we use when things break down. right? Because you have an idea of how you want your school day to go. You have an idea of what you want to experience as a student. As an adult, sometimes it doesn't happen the way you want. And so when I came to Marine Joy, one of the things was just there were too many kids out of class. There's far too many children missing time in the class periods. That was impacting our learning. That was impacting our outcomes. I'm sure as you looked at our data, one of the things that you'll notice is that over at least like the past couple of years coming back from COVID, that we've exceeded growth each year, 95% and 97% in consecutive years. That's not simply because we have great teachers, that is part of it, but it's also because we're trying to set the conditions where students are in class and they're able to actually access the learning. And so when a student actually has difficulties in class, they know that our first move is not, you're out of here. Right? Our teachers walk through a process every class period, whether you're in middle school or elementary school, and attempting to give the student the opportunity to solve the problem themselves. It starts there. If a student reaches the point in which they notice, I actually can't solve this problem myself, whether it's an emotional issue or what have you, something's not working, the teacher recognizes it too, they reach out to our team, which is our student support team. In a previous model, traditional public school, I was the assistant principal. There was an ISS coordinator. Between the two of us, we were suspending kids and putting them in ISS. We are not doing that at Marine Joy. So our students, there is a student support team, which I'll speak to if there's time, and those teammates actually, they meet and counsel students on a daily basis. That looks like being able to help the student identify what were the preceding incidents that led to you making a decision you made. Sometimes it has nothing to do with the classroom, nothing to do with the teacher or anything. I brought it with me to school. Right? And so they identify those things with the student, help them with recognizing the impact, and help them with recognize the implications of that decision so that they can practice what do I need to do in order to actually remain in my classroom and actually be able to access learning. When I hit that point of frustration and where my brain shuts down and I go in defense, how do I actually prevent that? If I'm ever in that space, how do I get out of that space? And then they also work with our teachers to make sure they close that loop. We noticed that was one of the biggest gaps we had. Often, if any of you have been an administrator, you know that you might solve a problem with a kid, and then they get back to the class and the problem resurfaces again because the problem was never with you. And so we help our teachers learn how to close the loop with students so that that part of the relationship that might have broken in that moment is restored, and the child can continue to recognize this is a place that I want to be and a place that I'm welcome to learn. We can go to the next slide. One of our models here, this is also a supporting move. Our elementary students have what's called community circle. Our middle school students have what's called advisory. It's a constant part of their day. Elementary students start their day in circles. They're learning different tools using a program called Toolbox. That's part of it. They learn about the different tools that they can use to build SEL competencies. You'll hear teachers throughout the day reminding students even of the moments in which those tools make sense to use so that the student is able to learn how to do that on their own. We want our students to become independent agents, and so what we do is just kind of provide the scaffolds along the way, starting in elementary school. When our middle schoolers get to advisory in middle school, that is a time where they similarly circle at times, but also discuss different topics and things that may be happening in school or things that are coming up to help them continue to develop their sense of community. One of the things that we know is really important amongst like all students is that they have at least one, preferably more, but at least one relationship with an adult that they trust. When I get there, I'll mention our director of campus culture, formerly our restorative practices coordinator, who one of the things that she does is make sure that whenever solving problems with students, she asks them, who is an adult that you trust? That student identifies that adult. Sometimes you don't know that student, you're that student's person, but she lets that person know that that student said that they're that person to help continue to create that relationship and create that bond so that as those moments occur, the student knows what to do and knows who they can come to. Okay, cool. This idea here, keep small things small. It starts in elementary school. We're a K-8 school, if I didn't say that already. We're a K-8 school, and so everything builds from that foundation. But from adults to children alike, we try to make sure that we are responding appropriately to behaviors and choices. It's easy to make an emotional decision. As an adult, you get in a situation, you realize I needed something in this moment that probably meant time before I spoke to this child. And so the reminders keep all small things small. Our students do the same thing, respond to with the appropriate level of emotional presence. Our staff do the same thing as well. And so we can keep going from there. This, one of the things is because the work of working with people is really complex and there's lots of moving parts all the time. And if you're trying to have a model that is more human-centered, it takes more work. It's slower. It's less efficient, but the outcomes are better. In order to support those efforts, though, one of the things we did with our student support team was we created a standardized playbook for behaviors. Given that we're an independent charter school, right, we rely upon ourselves. We develop partnerships with other people, but ultimately everything that we do happens in-house. And so we needed to create a playbook that would help adults know and transparently know from a leadership level to a staff level how decisions are being made in different situations. Also, if we ever needed to call an audible, we knew why we were calling that, and folks would understand exactly what we were transitioning from. It also leads to transparency with students and consistency with them as well, which is a huge part of our model as well. And so we have that playbook supporting our efforts as well. We have our intervention team. Schools have their intervention teams. Ours meet bi-weekly, focused on using disciplinary data, whether that is just students having resets, whether there's a student on suspension, or there's even data coming from our intervention team themselves on how well a student is progressing towards their goals. We this year have added using what's called the DESA Mini, using that data more explicitly, which also measures students' social emotional proficiencies. So that team reviews that data and identifies students who need help. And so then they connect the right people on the right teams with those students to make sure they're getting intervention and support early, if they can do it early, or responsively and effectively if they can do that instead. This note here, what you're seeing is one of our incentive-based systems. We've always been a school that has used some level of PBIS model, right? Like I said, some things are not revolutionary, they're just effective. And so this year, what we've leaned into is Class Dojo, which is great because it's free, which allows us to put money elsewhere. But we use Class Dojo to reinforce the positive behaviors that are connected to our core values amongst our students, celebrate milestones with them, communicate with their families, and as well when they make poor choices, make sure they know what that poor choice was and their parents are aware of it as well. For sure, this tool helps us stay connected with our families, knowing that there's absolutely no way we know we're going to be successful if we don't have the partnership of our parents. The last element here, when you see that underneath Class Dojo, is the school-wide incentives. School should be fun. School should be fun. Right? As a high school administrator, I knew a lot of students who were jaded, who came as freshmen and were already done with school. I knew 17-year-old freshmen, they were extremely jaded. We don't want students going through school feeling like this is not the place for me and having all the confirming reasons why it's not the place for them. And so one thing we make sure is true is that throughout our year, every single quarter, every month, that they're a celebratory and enriching experience for our students. That looks like field trips across all grade levels, taking students to places that are educational, taking places that are just fun. We're going to take you to Galaxy Fun Park because we think you should have fun being at school. Block parties amongst our elementary students. Our student government plans the events for students in middle school just to continue to identify ways in which this is your place. This is your place. We built it for you. You should enjoy it, and here are ways that you can enjoy it. We should actually scroll to the teams then. Let's scroll down. Let's go. We can stop right here, noticing the time. So this is our student support services. That involves our director of campus culture. That involves our dean of students, 2 counselors, student support interventionists, a social emotional learning coordinator, and our equity and community facilitator. This is a team of people who are they're non-instructional staff, though many of them have instructional backgrounds. But we know that it's important, if we're going to actually make this model work, that we have to invest in people who can actually carry the day. And so we believe that as people over programs, we believe that it's important that that students know who these people are in their buildings, that they're able to have the tools they need, they're able to have the resources they need. And so this team works together, whether that's facilitating restorative circles with students, where students are able to say, hey, I have an issue with another student. I know the better way to solve it is not with my hands and not with my words online. I want some help to actually have a conversation with the student, though, because I know I can't do it myself yet. And so we facilitate those. We have students who say, I have an issue with a teacher. And rather than saying, that teacher doesn't like me, so I'm going to refuse to do work in class, I can request someone to support me having a conversation with my teacher that leads to us actually mending whatever the fences are, and then me investing in class again. Our teachers can do the exact same thing. They can request such with another student. They can also request support with a staff member. Unfortunately, the reality is we know the workplace conflicts are real. And so we want our teachers and our staff to also know that we don't live in a space where we hold those things. And so if there is an issue, address the issue, solve the problem so we can move forward, because we came here for a purpose and we didn't come here for the problem, right? I think I'm out of time, correct?
And
I will stop.
We'd also be remiss if we did not shout out Janae Powell, our director of campus culture. She's the architect of most of all of this. And she's also a Black woman who's doing really good work, so if you want to shout her out, she's here. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cannon and Mr. Wall. Let's move next to the issue session, and with that particular session, we're going to have Mr. Cody Kinsley and Hannah Leah Hoberman to discuss the issue.
Hey,
Good morning.
morning, everyone.
Morning.
Great to be here with you all on this lovely winter day. So I'd like to start with kind of two broad statements, but before I do that, let me introduce my colleague, Hanalea Hoberman. Hanalea, who some of you know, really serves as our executive lead at the Department of Health and Human Services for one of three top priorities that we have, which is child and family well-being. Hanalea has helped shepherd our work in this space, in particular with a focus on school mental health. We're looking forward to sharing with you a bit of what we're doing, but really we come in effort to continue our partnership with the board and with the Department of Public Instruction in trying to support the mental health and well-being of students. So perhaps students, let me start there. I stand before you as the proud product of New Hanover County Public Schools. My parents had the very good fortune of moving into the Middletown Loop area when I was a young child, and I attended Ogden Elementary. And it was the hard work of the school teachers and the counselors and the staff at that school and many others that created in me the stability and support that I needed to go on to become a first-generation college student and eventually end up in the role that I'm in today. I hope that all of you see me as a generally good investment. Under investment. But some of you may disagree with particular things, in which case, blame Hanalea. The second kind of big overarching thing that I want to touch on that was embedded in that is that people deeply believe in the Department of Health and Human Services, where our mission is to support the health and well-being of all North Carolinians, that behavioral health is essential to health. And for the last 2 years, we have been on a, oh, look at there, I'm live. Everybody just missed all my great opening comments. You know, phone a friend, they were really wonderful, you missed out. Lost my train of thought. We have been supporting the health and well-being of all North Carolinians. That's our mission at the department. We believe that behavioral health is essential to health. We also believe that a behavioral health system in North Carolina has been underfunded and under-resourced forever. And for a long time, we have been incredibly focused on trying to add more supports to the treatment end of the spectrum. But imagine the system that we have built, which is a very long tunnel where people fall into a growing, more comfortable Tempur-Pedic mattress of care and support, with no opportunities, prevention, no limbs in that deep well for people to try to catch themselves as they fall. At the same time, behavioral health is a tremendous investment. We see that when people are mentally well, not only, and I loved the prior speakers' points that they were sharing around conflict resolution, but the interpersonal aspects of their lives are better, but also the long-term costs around chronic illness and well-being are lower when we invest in mental health. And also mental health is a great protective factor around substance use disorder and beyond. All that to say, we have come up with a strategy that goes after meeting people where they are. And we believe that our kids are in schools. And so that is why we want to partner with you today. So let me spend a little bit defining the problem. I'm not touching the mic. Defining the problem. So as you all may know, North Carolina is 42nd in the country with regard to mental health among a number of factors. I think this is a stark comparison to being number 1 for business in our country, and number 42 for mental health, and a similar rating on a number of other health factors. At some point, you know, that dog don't hunt. It's going to snap back if we're not investing in the health and well-being of our students for the future, because a healthy workforce is also a productive one. We have a number of other factors that show challenges in the classroom related to this, and I don't think a day goes by where my phone doesn't ring because of a problem that a child is facing, either to get care or a teacher is facing in trying to support a complex child around behavioral issues. Next slide. We believe that taking mental health supports into the classroom
it also serves a dual purpose. In the research, it shows that people who are receiving mental health supports and have the supports to grow into resilient individuals and create stronger learning environments, and at the same time, as people learn, it builds protective factors for their mental health. So this is a smart dual investment for us, and I think showcases the opportunity for our collective partnership. Next slide. As I mentioned, we had established a bit of a vision in this space. To look back, really, our partnership with the Healthy Schools team, I want to thank them and Superintendent Truitt and DPI for their long partnership in this space. Really, I think in earnest, we started growing together in 2022. And many of you will recall that we were before you at the end of that year and presenting what we would then publish in March of 23, which is our School Behavioral Health Action Plan. The School Behavioral Health Action Plan was then folded into, we love action plans, was then folded into our Behavioral Health Action Plan that Governor Cooper put out last year. That action plan called for $1 billion worth of investment from the General Assembly to support the mental health and well-being of North Carolina. I'm happy to share and thankful for our friends at the legislature who funded over $800 million for mental health, much of which was in that plan. We didn't get everything that we wanted in the School Behavioral Health Action Plan, but a number of the key efforts were funded, and we've been working with the Healthy Schools team to quickly get that money out. This resources will come into the state over the next 2 years, and I would be remiss not to also mention that all of that funding was made possible because of Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion allowed for a $1.6 billion signing bonus to flow into the state from the federal government, and as I mentioned, the General Assembly apportioned over $800 million of that for mental health purposes. What's also exciting, of course, about Medicaid expansion is that that will also help many students and their families. 80% of the folks who benefit from Medicaid expansion are in working families. And so, we also know the deep connection and correlation between healthy parents and healthy children. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we have already started to accomplish a number of things. We established the first together electronic health record system in our schools so that we can have better data and insight into supporting children. We have been able to train over 700 school staff. That's a drop in the bucket compared to the need, of course, in mental health first aid. And actually right now, I am missing the first half of my mental health first aid class that I'm going to today because I chose you over that. But I will be running off after this to finish that training because I believe that we all have a responsibility of being able to recognize when a mental health crisis is unfolding and how can we help support the person to the resources that they need to do that. I think that this training is evidence-based and has been deployed in a number of settings. It's particularly powerful in schools. I remember when I was at Ogden Elementary, it was often the relationship with the custodial staff that was the place where we went to talk to people and the relationships that we built, and making sure that not just teachers, but that all staff have access to these tools. The mental health first aid training is not just about recognizing a problem and responding to it, but it's an interesting little bit of a head fake in that it promotes health and well-being and wellness and self-care for yourself. And so it gives people some resiliency tools. So it's a good way for us to help support those staff's mental health and services well. We also know from the research that when people feel supported with resources in this way, that their mental health improves overall. And then, of course, beyond just being able to recognize a problem and support our school staff and our teachers, we also know having an adequate resource and community resource network that people can be connected to is critical. This goes back to the funding that we have been able to secure. So in particular, of that, we've been able to put out $14.8 million. We've partnered with a number of LEAs in building out resources, and we're really trying to come up with a menu of options in partnership with you all and to go to these LEAs, because we know that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. We want to try to take things to the communities for what they're ready for, but again, follow the evidence base on what will make a difference. This is a challenging time for healthcare, period, and we'll have some time for questions and comments, of course, but we're trying to also thread the needle here on staffing issues, making sure that we're being very mindful about how hard it is to hire people, how hard it is to mitigate around instructional time, and come up with innovative healthcare delivery solutions such as telehealth, et cetera, to make sure that we're supporting people with those resources to expand access to care. Next slide. So I mentioned supporting the workforce. One good example of these sorts of innovations is our North Carolina Psychiatric Access Line. This program has been in place for 5 years. This started as an opportunity for primary care providers to be able to pick up the phone and to be quickly on the other line with the behavioral health expert. So that as a primary care person was struggling with someone in their office that was experiencing addiction issues, anxiety, depression, et cetera, that while they're perfectly trained to support that person, they may not feel resourced and confident enough to do it. And having a behavioral health expert on the other end of the phone can help support them. That expands our access to care. You know, behavioral health, hate to break it to you, is not a specialty issue. It's an issue that is a primary care issue, and we're working hard to get it integrated at that level of care. A lot of issues can be managed at that level of care, but a lot of our providers need to be supported so that they can do it. We've been able to build on that infrastructure, which I think is a smart investment as opposed to creating dual infrastructures that expand that access across the state for a number of other purposes. And one of those purposes is allowing teachers and school staff to be able to pick up the phone and have a behavioral health expert on the other end of the phone to talk about how to respond to a particular issue in a classroom. Is this a behavioral health problem? What's going on? How do I mitigate conflict in an appropriate way? And also, again, in the same way that mental health first aid is, this is a source of support so that people know they're not alone, which also helps bolster resiliency among our workforce as well. So expanding NCPAL has been great. And again, thanking the General Assembly for funding that program with recurring dollars in the last budget. So we've actually been able to sustain it. We piloted it for 5 years, and now we're going to be able to build it into the infrastructure going forward. Next slide. So I alluded to the investment for the Behavioral Health Action Plan, and this is how some of the resources will break down over the next 2 years. It's incredibly large dollars, but it's also really just a down payment on where I know we need to be over the long haul. As I mentioned, our behavioral health system has been underfunded for a long time. And you'll see, I think, in this is that we're trying to both go after the areas where the biggest needs are, but go after where the people are. And it's in that child and family well-being line that we are really focusing on those dollars for schools. Next slide. So I'm going to transition things to Hanalea to start to dive a little bit into some of the programs that we're planning on, that we have been funding. But I think some of the big takeaways that you'll see is that we've tried to braid dollars together, whether they be federal resources that we had on the other side of COVID, these additional resources that we're getting from the General Assembly as part of our Medicaid expansion signing bonus, and then also just trying to help encourage and support LEAs and the investments that they're making on their own behalf into putting these things into evidence-based strategies, which will all fit together. Thank you again for having me, and look forward to the conversation.
Just a little bit shorter than the secretary.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
State Treasurer Falwell, can I ask the Secretary a question?
Yes, please be brief, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. Actually, not a question, Secretary. Thank you for being there. And 16 years ago, I worked on the effects of student mobility on academic performance. And as you consider what you're doing, I'd like for you to think about that. You know, having a high inventory turn at Harris Teeter in the produce section is a great thing, but having a high inventory turn, especially among our at-risk schools, where some of the teachers are seeing a 37% inventory turn as far as the students they see on a yearly basis, is terrible. So I just wanted to plant that seed, sir.
Appreciate it, Treasurer Falwell. Thank you.
Right, you can go to the next slide. So as the Secretary shared, we're so grateful to the General Assembly to have funding specifically focused on child and family well-being with a particular focus on behavioral health. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about where we're going, and in particular, what this means for our schools and our students. So our goal for this funding is to ensure that children with behavioral health needs can stay in their homes. And we're going to do this by making sure that they receive the right services, that those services are high quality, that they're child-centered, and they're trauma-informed. We've identified 4 key system needs in order to achieve this goal. And when these needs are addressed, all of them will have a positive impact on our students and our schools. We need to make sure that students' needs are identified sooner and that they're matched more quickly to the right services. This can prevent an in-school behavioral health crisis, and it can reduce the number of kids who are taken out of school for treatment so that they see fewer interruptions in their learning. We're very focused, as I mentioned, on making sure that kids can stay in their homes, which means we're focused on making sure that kids can stay in their communities and their schools where we know they thrive. And with all this, some kids will need specialty residential treatment. And for those kids, we need to make sure that they have better access to high quality services so that they can get the treatment they need and return home to their family and their school to continue thriving. Next slide. In order to meet these system needs, we've identified 4 broad areas of investment. We're going to invest in community-based services. We're not just going to support youth, but also their families and their schools that we know are so critical in caring for them every day, and this includes direct investments in school behavioral health. By bringing more access to therapeutic programs in family-type settings, we're going to reduce the need for kids to leave their homes and their communities for treatment. On the first slide of this presentation, you may have noticed a statistic that is rather alarming. On any given week in North Carolina, on average, 50 children are sleeping in a DSS office or an emergency department. These are places that no child should be living. However, many of these kids stay in the emergency department for months. We know that when they're in the emergency department, kids are unlikely to be getting their educational needs met. I heard a story recently about a hospital where kids could just decline to meet their education coordinator. And so if a kid is in that situation for months, they could be declining to receive education for months. And at the same time, their behavioral health needs might be escalating. So by making sure that we bring a variety of options that are child-centered and appropriate, where kids can be stabilized, their needs assessed, and we can quickly get an appropriate care plan in place, we can make sure that kids are out of school for shorter amounts of time and increase the likelihood that their next placement is permanent. And finally, as I shared, there will be kids who need intensive out-of-home treatment. And for those kids, we're going to increase access to specialized options so that they can better get their needs met. And we're going to improve quality across the board so that when kids do have to leave their homes and communities, those stays are shorter, they get the support they need, and they can return home for good, having had their needs met. Next slide. As we shared, school behavioral health is a critical priority for us with this funding. We have dedicated $7 million to school-focused initiatives. And with this funding, we're going to increase the availability of behavioral health services in schools. We're going to expand access to evidence-based services in the community so that kids in schools can get connections to the services they need out of school. And we're going to provide support to schools and families so that children with behavioral health needs can thrive inside and outside of school. We are so excited to be able to share with you many of the successes we've had on the School Behavioral Health Action Plan. At the same time, we know that a number of those strategies have not been completed, and we're keeping these in mind as we're planning these investments. For instance, we're very focused on the opportunity that school behavioral health, telebehavioral health services can offer to students, particularly those in rural and under-resourced communities who may otherwise not have those needs met. and making sure that those services can connect families and students so that they actually get the services that are identified. We're working closely with DPI and particularly the Healthy Schools team to plan these investments to make sure that they meet the needs of schools and students. Next slide. So when we think about school behavioral health, we need to think about an approach at multiple levels. This approach, known as MTSS, can help us to make sure that the kids with the most intensive needs have those needs identified and met, and can also work broadly because we know that so many of our students are dealing with everyday behavioral health concerns. The opportunity that MTSS offers is exemplified by Project Aware, which in districts where they implemented these kind of multi-level comprehensive behavioral health programs saw resulting district-wide reductions in suspensions. This funding in particular is very focused on kids with specialized behavioral health needs. While all kids are dealing with some level of day-to-day behavioral health issues, we know that children with these specialized and highly complex needs are particularly vulnerable, and that when these kids' needs go unmet, they can't show up to school ready to learn. Children who have been psychiatrically hospitalized are significantly less likely to graduate. And those in foster care in North Carolina are 30 percentage points, have their four-year graduation rates are 30 percentage rates lower than for our overall student population. By working on the kids with the most intensive needs, we're gonna help our schools to close those gaps. At the same time, we know that in order to address the broader behavioral health trends we're seeing in our state, we need to invest more in prevention and early intervention. Next slide. The impact for schools of this funding is not limited to our direct work in schools. There are so many programs that are going to reach into our schools and into our communities and have a benefit for students in schools. And I just want to share with you a couple that we're planning to expand where we're already having an impact. High Fidelity WRAP is an intensive care coordination program where a team of supports wraps around a family to help them navigate multiple systems, from behavioral health systems to schools. We know that schools are often the first to identify a student's behavioral health needs and connect a family to services. But those systems are complex and families are overburdened, and they may never fully engage in those services, which can come back into the school building. High Fidelity WRAP has been shown to work. It improves child behavior, and it reduces the likelihood that that child would need to be in a more restrictive setting, which means that with High Fidelity WRAP, we can keep kids in their schools, see fewer educational disruptions, and make sure that they are actually in school with a focus on learning. In the last year alone, we expanded High Fidelity WRAP to reach an additional 30 counties. So we're well on our way, with 73 counties now covered, to our goal of reaching all 100 counties with this program. Next slide. I also want to talk to you about Moore's Mobile Crisis. This is a child-focused mobile crisis team. Moore's Mobile Crisis can work with a child and a family in the moment of a crisis in real time to assess safety, de-escalate, and create a crisis care plan. We're already in 7 counties and we're planning to expand. When schools are aware of this resource, they use it. It can provide an alternative to calling law enforcement or an ambulance that can be so much more disruptive. In fact, in other states that have implemented similar programs, schools were the highest referral source for these programs. And I want to tell you a little bit about how this can look for a school and a child in that school. So I want to tell you about Sarah. Sarah showed up to school one day feeling down, and her teacher overheard her talking about wanting to die. Instead of sending Sarah to the emergency department, which would have caused her to miss at least one day of school and could have been traumatic for Sarah, she worked with her school nurse to reach out to Mobile Crisis. Mobile Crisis met with Sarah at school. They called her family, and together they created a safety plan. In the days that followed, the team continued following up with Sarah and her family, connecting them to additional supports. And with this additional support over time, her suicidal ideation began to improve. Sarah's not alone. 40% of parents report that after a response from Mobile Crisis, their child's behavior improves. Next slide. Schools present an unparalleled opportunity to meet kids where they are and address their behavioral health needs. We're already moving the needle together. We're investing in school-based services, community-based services, connecting them in the schools, and we're supporting school success by ensuring that children with identified behavioral health needs, that the system around them is adequate to meet their needs. At the same time, we know we need to do more. None of this can replace a school counselor or a school social worker in a child's school. School instructional support staff remain a critical area for further investment. All of this is being done with one-time funding. So we'll need to work together to ensure that the progress we've made is sustained into the future. Just some examples with mental health first aid, that's being done with one-time funding, as well as what I shared with you about telebehavioral health services. We want to make sure our progress continues. And as I said, to really address the full spectrum of behavioral health needs of our students across the state, we need to invest more in prevention and early intervention. Next slide. We want to work with you together. And we know that as partners, we can make sure that all students and all children have the full opportunity to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Running quick on time, about on time, got one more speaker, but 2 questions only, please, because we're short on time. Anybody got questions or comment?
Back to the data report.
I'm gonna call her up later if we have time. I'm just talking for the speakers now.
Sure.
Anybody want to?
Well, I'd like to make a comment.
Okay,
please.
cool. Go ahead.
So I want to comment on actually, Hanalea, what you just said about school support personnel. I don't disagree with the idea that this cannot replace that. But when I combine everything that I've heard today, going back to the report, and I see that prior to the pandemic, we were trending down in the incidences of both in-school and out-of-school suspension, and we know that the majority of those instances were due to substance abuse at school, as opposed to acts of violence. That was the second greatest figure, were the acts of violence, but the first is the having controlled substances at school. And we've also seen this incredible jump between elementary school and middle school, which I think tells us that this is something that is beginning in earnest in adolescence. I don't know that all of our school support personnel are trained to deal in the types of things that you all are describing. And I think that for too long, we have expected our classroom teachers to be fully prepared to deal with these mental health issues in a way that they are not prepared. And at the same time, while I think that our social workers are very good at helping children with correct placements, they're not medical experts either. And so I would encourage us to think about what expansion of a mobile crisis response team looks like. I think that our school support personnel can be partners in that, but I think that there are also, as the data from Ms. Fairley's report shows, that there's something happening coming out of the pandemic that has caused these incredible increases that prior to the pandemic were on the downward slope. And it's going to take more than just school support personnel to work with families to rectify and begin to allow our students to heal. Thank you for being here.
Mr. Chair, may I respond? Yeah, may I respond?
Okay, please.
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge that point is spot on in the sense that I think you'll hopefully have seen in our theory of change is that we're trying to really bring resources into the school that can help support teachers so they can focus on their specialty goal of educating students. But, you know, depending on how deep they want to get as far as train themselves, we want to meet them where they are. But then if they also need to just pick up the phone in the moment and have the supports, whether that's NC-PAL, which we've already been able to scale, or Moore's Mobile Crisis, which, as Hanalei alluded to, just has phenomenal data in improving resources for folks, and while also keeping people in the classroom. Also note that we've done a quick dive here and just to this intersection of where kids are. Kids are also in a lot of other places earlier in life. And so early interventions and supportive factors for family members to help prevent some of these issues are also really important to us and part of a broader child and family well-being strategy to try to both curb substance use while also supporting overall mental health and well-being. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Well done job. Mr. Chair.
Secretary,
Go ahead.
before you leave, I just want to express on behalf of particularly the students that we serve, my colleagues on the board and educators across North Carolina, how grateful we are for your leadership. During the pandemic, our partnership with your agency was just crucial, and it's even more important now. And to set the record straight, we're really thankful that your parents gave the public schools of North Carolina a chance to invest in you, because just like you, every one of our students is worth investing in. And so we're committed to follow and work in partnership with you and your agency in any areas that you see that could help our students, their families, and our communities.
Well, I think you just made my mom's week. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, the last speaker we have will be Dr. Sarah Commissaro. You come up this time?
All right, good morning. Thank you to the chair, vice chair, superintendent, and all the members of the board and guests for inviting me today. My name is Sarah Commissaro, and I'm an assistant professor of public policy and economics at the Sanford School of Public Policy at Duke University. And I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about some of my research and some of my work, most of which is joint with my colleague, Dr. Stephen Hemelt at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm going to talk to you today about two particular areas, the first being child health and educational outcomes, and the second being our work on one particular model of school-based healthcare that has been going on right here in North Carolina. And I'll talk to you a little bit about other models for school-based healthcare and the evidence on how they impact students. Next slide. So first, I just want to highlight that from data across the U.S., we know that over the past several decades, there have been very large increases in the number of children in the U.S. who have been identified as living with chronic health conditions. And this is in part driven by improved diagnosis in areas such as ADHD, ADD, but also just this is a stylized fact that the number of children identified as having these health issues has increased pretty dramatically over time. Now, looking at the most recent data from the National Survey of Child Health, even in post or kind of during COVID pandemic years, we know that around 40% of children in the U.S. have health conditions that consistently and greatly affect their daily activities. About 23% have mental, emotional, developmental, or behavioral problems, and around 20% have not accessed medical care of any kind, so a physician visit, consultation with a nurse, in the past 12 months. Next slide. So why does this matter for our schools? We know that students with physical and mental health conditions miss more school and are more likely to be chronically absent, which is a key sort of policy issue and policy indicator that I study in my work. And they're more likely to be absent or chronically absent for health-related reasons. We also know from research in economics, which is my field, but also in public policy and education, that student attendance is a key determinant of educational outcomes in the short term, So things like test scores, on-time grade progression, but also longer run outcomes such as high school graduation. These are very, in my opinion, excellent papers that document this causal relationship between attending school and short and long run educational performance. And so what I want to talk about is the ways in which school-based healthcare offers the possibility to reach children where they are. I feel like I'm echoing the Secretary's prior comments because we know that kids are in schools. School-based healthcare has grown dramatically in the U.S. over the past decade, both in-person school-based healthcare, but also school-based telehealth, which is what I'll talk about in a few moments, which is what I've worked on. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about my research here. So this is based on a peer-reviewed research paper joint with my colleague, Dr. Stephen Hemelt, that is forthcoming in Education, Finance, and Policy. If anybody wants to read the journal article, I'd be more than happy to share it with you, but I'm going to give you the key takeaways today. So I first want to talk about how this work is based on the good work of those at the Center for Rural Health Innovation's Health eSchools program. This is a nonprofit organization in Spruce Pine, North Carolina, and I just want to express my gratitude to Amanda Martin and Dr. Steve North for the work that they have been doing, for working with myself and with Dr. Hemelt to learn about and use information about their program paired with data on students in North Carolina to allow us to do this study to try to ask this research question and answer this question of what is the causal impact. So I really want to move beyond association, correlation, to causal impacts of having access to school-based telemedicine on students' educational outcomes. And this is something, because of the work that the Center for Rural Health Innovation has been doing, that we're able to study using de-identified data on students in North Carolina public schools that's made accessible to researchers at Duke University. Okay, so I just want to tell you, I promise not to get too technical here, but a little bit about the study that we did and give you the key punchlines. So what we did was we studied the introduction of what are called school-based telemedicine clinics or school-based telemedicine centers in elementary and middle schools across 3 North Carolina school districts: McDowell County Schools, Mitchell County Schools, and Yancey County Schools. We're going to use the best sort of econometric and statistical methods that we know of to try to then assess or generate causal estimates of the causal effect of how having access to school-based telemedicine affects students' educational outcomes. Our key focus in this research study are the outcomes of chronic absenteeism, the number of days absent, and then we also, as sort of a third indicator, examine the likelihood that a child takes their end of grade, their EOG test, and we count that as sort of an additional measure of a child's presence in school. We're not using their score, we're just trying to say, were they present the day that the test was administered? Do we have a test score for them? We'll also look a little bit at reported disciplinary infractions, the same sort of reported incidents or reported infractions that we heard about earlier today. And so the conceptual idea, how we did this study, is we compared trends in these outcomes in schools in these 3 districts that got these telemedicine centers over the time period of about 2012 to 2017. So prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, this nonprofit organization was bringing telemedicine access into schools in these 3 county school districts. And so we have over 10 years worth of data. In some cases, we're able to look at student data points for over 500,000. This is students across years, so that's not the number of unique students, but we're using really large data sets to study how outcomes for students in schools that got telemedicine access compared to outcomes for students in similar schools nearby where there wasn't telemedicine access provided to them during the school day. The final thing I just want to highlight about what school-based telemedicine is, for those of you that maybe aren't as familiar with it, in this context, the work of Health eSchools and the Center for Rural Health Innovation was to provide or to set up sort of like a telemedicine clinic where a child could have a one-on-one appointment with a medical provider who's providing their medical expertise on the sort of other end of the line, if you will. This is a little bit different than what a telemedicine appointment might look like for you or I. How it's different is that In these school-based telemedicine clinics, there's actually a presenter. It's often the school nurse or someone who is helping to facilitate the appointment. It's not the job of that individual to be diagnosing or doing anything like this, but they're helping do a couple things. So what those are, they're managing sort of the queue of student appointments if there's more than one child that needs an appointment that day. But they're also able to use medical equipment that you or I don't have connected to our personal computers, but things like a stethoscope, an otoscope, and very specialized cameras. And so that the provider on the other end of the school-based telemedicine appointment can do a lot more in terms of diagnosis, evaluation, of using this medical equipment that plugs right into the side of an iPad, and that the person on the other end can be receiving sort of data in real time. And I want to emphasize too that that's what it looks like today. It's like an iPad where these things plug in. Back in 2012 when these things started, it was the big monitors, the big things, where your computer sat by your desk. And so the ways in which it was still the same like plugins, but the ways in which this technology has changed over the past like decade or so is really remarkable. We do a little bit in terms of cost estimates in the paper as well. The cost of these this equipment and the computing equipment alone has fallen dramatically. So that's my aside on school-based telemedicine. So I have two pictures to show you today that are going to hopefully drive home the punchline for our study. So this is the first one on the y-axis, which is the vertical one. We're looking at the likelihood that an individual student is chronically absent in one of the schools that receives telemedicine access in the years leading up to when telemedicine access was introduced. And so that's the vertical dashed line where we're drawing sort of two distinctions here. So to the left of the vertical dashed line, we're looking at the years before there was telemedicine access in school, and to the right, we're looking at the years after there was telemedicine access. And so hopefully what you take away from this is that there's no sort of prior trend in schools that eventually get telemedicine relative to those that don't. But in the years that follow the introduction of school-based telemedicine in a child's school, you see the likelihood that a child is chronically absent falling by around 2.5 percentage points. And I'll tell you a little bit more like what that magnitude means in just a few slides here. In the next one here, I'm doing sort of the same figure. This is just the number of days that a child is absent. Same thing in the years prior to the introduction of school-based telemedicine in the child's school. There's no sort of concerning trend. That's what we would be sort of looking for. But then in the years that follow the introduction of school-based telemedicine, you see that the number of days absent falls by almost a full day. So I'm going to summarize this all for you on these slides here. So what we find is that school-based telemedicine access reduces the likelihood that a child is chronically absent by about 2.5 percentage points. That might sound small, but relative to baseline, to the years prior, this is a 29% reduction in the likelihood of chronic absenteeism for that child, and that it reduces the number of days absent by almost a full day, or by about 10%. Some things that I'm not showing you today, but I'd be more than happy to talk to you offline after the meeting. We also find in our study some suggestive, but admittedly a bit weaker, so I want to be fully transparent with you all. We find some weaker evidence of reductions in what we term violent or weapons-related disciplinary infractions, okay? And so we've done some classification of all of the different disciplinary codes that you all saw presented this morning, and we've categorized them as best we can, also following the work of previous researchers into those we consider to be violent or weapons related, and we see some suggestive evidence of reductions in disciplinary infractions of these types when children have access to school-based telemedicine. How or why might that be happening? We speculate, and this is a little bit more trying to understand qualitatively from the folks who are actually doing this work, what the mechanism or how could that relationship be. And we think that, of course, referrals to mental health treatment, but also medication management, these are things that the school-based telemedicine center might be doing for some of the children in these schools. And so these findings are, again, a little bit more sensitive to the type of comparison schools, but we do believe that they're present in at least some of our data. Okay, so caveats and limitations, I already told you. In this work, we're focusing on the school years prior to COVID-19, but I also view this as an incredible strength of being able to capitalize on the work that's been done in North Carolina. We have over 10 years worth of data in our study, looking at this long history of school-based telemedicine to try to really produce causal research. We're only able to look at 3 school districts that we know are sort of not representative of the state as a whole, but that is where the program was rolled out, and so we decided to study it. And I also just want to caution that our context is not the best to study effects on student subgroups, although of course that is something we would certainly want to do. We find some suggestive evidence that reductions in chronic absenteeism are larger for male students as opposed to females, but we're just not in a good context to study many other student subgroups, unfortunately, and this is a direction where I think future research would be fantastic. I think I'll summarize really, really carefully here. These have been actually brought up in some previous remarks today. So of course, school-based telemedicine is not the only potential model, not the only potential way to introduce school-based healthcare into our schools. There are these traditional, what I would call now brick and mortar school-based health centers, where I think in my sort of opinion, the correlational evidence suggests that these tend to be positive, but in my view, the causal evidence is a little bit more limited. And then, of course, as was raised in previous remarks, there's the effects of specialized instructional support personnel, such as guidance counselors and school nurses, where I think the causal evidence is most strongly suggestive of the role that guidance counselors have in reducing the incidence of disciplinary infractions. That's my sort of reading of the causal evidence in this area. So those are other alternatives outside of school-based telemedicine, where there's been, in my view, rigorous studies to support these models. Should any of you actually want to read the research paper, I provided the link here. There are ungated versions of it online if you want sort of the free version. But otherwise, thank you so much for having me today. Should anybody want to get in touch, I'm always happy to speak in more detail about the role of research. I love talking with policymakers and people who are actually trying to make decisions for our students and their families, and email is the best way to reach me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We got 2 minutes left. Ms. Fairley, will you come up, please? Because Dr. Williams had a question about the data report. Can you come up, please, briefly?
Thank you. Less a question, more comment. We, at our local district, review every month the data upon which this report was built. I go back to things like short-term suspensions. There's a lot of conversation about rates. For some subgroups, out of 1,000 students, the rate was over 300. But we found when we looked at the local level, beyond the number of incidents, at the number of students, we found that to be very revealing. The 300 incidents per 1,000 students were attributable to a much smaller number of students per 1,000 students. We found that to be very informative. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, the only item we have consent, which would be the 2023 Healthy Active Children Policy Report and 2023 School Mental Health Policy Report. And with that, I rest my case.
Thank you, Mr. Keenan. We'll now move to the, where are we? Educator Standards and Practice Committee with Dr. Oxendine. Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I am Olivia Oxendine. I chair this committee, and joining me in that responsibility is Dr. Donna Tipton-Rogers. A rather short agenda this month, the 2 action items. The first item is, both items are requests from EPPs to receive initial authorization to prepare educators. One of those applications coming from Moreland University, which is based in Washington, D.C. The second application is coming from KIP, Knowledge and Power, and already at the mic is Dr. Steinberg, who is going to give us a little bit of an update based on some questions that I sent to him recently, specifically with regard to the Moreland University application around the EdTPA or the PPTA, whether that is required of that institution, and also a little bit more information on how it's possible to complete a teacher education program in 9 months.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine, and good afternoon, everyone. Regarding the Moreland University's proposal for initial authorization, just a quick couple bullet points here. This is a nationally accredited program through the Council of Accreditation of Educator Preparation, or CAPE. And according to law, demonstrating national accreditation is one of the 2 pathways for initial EPP authorization in the state. So in short, the department is recommending this board approve Moreland University for initial authorization in those license areas that are provided in your materials. I do want to respond to Dr. Oxendine's questions. There were a couple things that she brought up that were not mentioned in the January presentation. One, is it possible for a student to complete the program, including student teaching, in 9 months? And the answer to that is yes, and it's not uncommon that residency route programs can be completed within 1 year of time. And the reason for that is because under the residency route, there is no student teaching, because they are a teacher of record. They're actually practicing their teaching while they're doing their school preparation. So to answer your question, it is possible, and it is happening in other programs within the state. I do agree with you. If student teaching were a part of that, that would certainly extend things out a good bit. The second one is what are the candidate admission requirements? And the candidate admission requirements are that you have to have a bachelor's degree or higher. That's the minimum in order to apply and be considered to enter the program. And you also have to have a 3.0 GPA in that initial submission. So those are 2 requirements that both their program and the state require in applications into an EPP. And then the third was around whether this board has the power, the ability to approve an ed prep program, whether or not there's some mention about EdTPA or PPAT assessment in there. The answer is yes. EdTPA and PPAT is not a requirement for EPP initial authorization, but it is a requirement for licensure. So I'll certainly circle back with them, make sure that they understand that as a requirement in North Carolina obligations, and it certainly is a requirement that they're going to want to incorporate into their strategy going forward.
Thank you very much. I think that clarity is very important, especially around the EdTPA or the PPAT. That assessment's so important. It would be sad to get a candidate to the finish line and realize, oh my goodness, I haven't taken past one of those assessments, whichever is required by the institution, and that would prohibit licensing. So any follow-up that you can do, Andrew, on that will be appreciated. And I thank you so much for getting on top of it, because it was kind of last minute when it came to my attention as I was doing my final review of the items late last night. I thought, let me do one more check, and that kind of stood out to me.
Madam Chairwoman,
Yes.
State Treasurer Falwell, for the gentleman who just presented, this application that's coming through us through KIP, does it have any reference in either the application or in actual practice of any CRT beliefs?
I am not aware of that in this application, no, sir.
Okay, so any language that talks about committed to ending white supremacy and anti-black beliefs, you're not aware of any of that being present in any of that?
Just for clarity's sake, we are referring right now to Moreland University, and that's there is no reference in question about those topics associated with that application, sir.
Then if the board will accept my apology and let me ask that question when we get to that issue, then I appreciate it. And you also, thanks.
Sure.
Thank you. So we'll move on to KIP.
Sure. In the KIP application, again, just a couple of bullet points here. The North Carolina KIP charter system is also bringing this a proposal for initial EPP authorization in North Carolina. Since this program is new and it's also not nationally accredited, they are submitting for approval under the state application process. That involves a peer review with a bunch of national accredited reviewers from CAPE to look at their submission and make sure that it's in alignment with expectations that meet both North Carolina expectations as well as national expectations. Those materials have been peer reviewed and found to be in compliance with North Carolina's expectations. In the January meeting, a follow-up question of KIPP surfaced about how reading is assessed in their program offerings. We did reach back out to KIPP, and they did submit a formal response to that, which I've added to your materials. So their response to the reading question is in your materials. And again, the department is recommending this proposal for initial authorization in the areas requested.
Thank you very much. And let me add a point about the inclusion of the science of reading. It's a very thorough, maybe a one-page, maybe a two-page item that go into really good detail in terms of how reading is taught theoretically and practically. So I was very pleased to see that addition. I will address the treasurer's comments on references around that imply CRT, because it came to my attention again last night, sometime yesterday when I was reviewing the items one last time. I happened to go through each one of them, and in the KIPP application I did see something, either it's a tenet or it's a philosophy, or it is something in pedagogical practices, and it does reference terms like to interrupt white beliefs around white supremacy, and also further in that statement, it's maybe about a 15-word statement, and some reference to maybe anti-black beliefs, and that does move in the direction of, if you think about that whole statement, it does move in the direction of the critical race theory. Now, will that prohibit KIPP from receiving the initial authorization? No, because that is not the way it is on this state board. And we can vote on this request as we choose to, but I just feel compelled to raise that issue because I know how I'm going to vote. And I would rather see our schools of education and those that are on the alternative routes to becoming a teacher, I would rather see the time spent preparing fine teachers of reading, fine teachers of mathematics, fine teachers of science education, and moving in a direction that is divisive and it doesn't lead to good things and good feelings about each other. I just depart from that kind of philosophy. So I will probably do additional research on KIPP. I know how I'm going to vote. It is each one of us, we have a right to vote as we see fit. So I did feel compelled to raise that.
If I can add one thought to that, I did get that note from you late last night. I was able to reach out to leadership to KIPP with the exact language from the submission, and I asked them if they could clarify about the questions that you've raised here. I did reach him about 10 minutes before I came up here today, so my expectation is that I will have a formal response in writing to this board in time for tomorrow morning. We can get that to you first thing tomorrow morning.
I absolutely appreciate that. Okay. Questions, comments from my colleagues?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Just for clarity on my part, the KIPP program, is it only for the KIPP staff, or would it be statewide?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me expound on that a little bit. So I think idealistically what they are trying to do, not unlike a school district would do, is to help, pipeline funnel folks, to meet the needs of their schools in North Carolina. However, when they are admitted as an initially authorized EPP, they are capable of, a candidate is capable of joining that program and then taking a job anywhere else It's not that you're limited to only operating within KIPP. Just like if I was to go through the Charlotte MEC EPP, I'm not limited to just operating within that. So their preparation obligation is to prepare a teacher like any authorized ed prep program to be effective in a public school setting anywhere in North Carolina. So that's their first and foremost. So does that help clarify a little bit?
Yeah, so it's not self-serving.
Well, I think that they're trying to help themselves by having an in-house program, but that doesn't mean that a candidate couldn't go into that program and then take a job anywhere else in North Carolina.
Thank you.
Yes.
Now, KIPP is at Gaston,
There are 8 sites in North Carolina.
but it's probably,
I'd have to look to see where they are. Off the top of my head, I can't respond to that. I'm sorry.
okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, Madam Chair. It's
By all
lunchtime. Dr. Seiberg, as you are collecting your formal response for them, I would like for that response to include how they are defining white supremacy in their statement.
Certainly.
I do think also as you move into that response that, I still don't know what language we're talking about. So so can we have some specificity there, please, rather than illusion?
I'll be sure to make sure that that's included in the formal response so that you have clarity on the sentence.
Well, Mr. Hall raised an important point about self-serving, and I think I know what that means. But in the application, Dr. Seiberg, do you recall anything about the recruitment base?
Again, I'd have to look at the materials to really,
On the spot.
yeah, just to see. Not off the top of my head, I can't respond to that.
Very good. Any other questions or comments? If not, that completes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. We'll now break for lunch and return at 1:15. 1:15.